Views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Talk of the Bay, your premier news show for KSQD 90.7 FM KSQD, your home for everything Santa Cruz on your FM dial. And today, I will introduce myself first. My name is Chen Mills. I'm a frequent host here on Talk of the Bay, a guest host, and today we have a very special program for you on the climate crisis and city growth and development. This is a topic, and also city policies. We'll include all city policies. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart as someone who ran for county supervisor and was looking into, as a former climate activist and as a current climate activist. Actually, I was former when I was running because I had no time for that. But really thinking about how do we deal with growth, the pressure for growth, the pressure for affordable housing and workforce housing, missing middle housing, and the fact that, all production of buildings and construction generates a tremendous amount of greenhouse gases, as do a lot of products, cars, things that we use every day, things that we buy every day. So I'm really excited to have some special guests today. I'm going to introduce them more fully, but we have Michael Levy, a climate activist, Rick Longinotti, who is with the Committee for Sustainable Transportation, very involved in trying to stop projects that he feels will be averse to the climate, the health of the climate, and Mr. Fred Keeley, who is currently candidate for mayor in Santa Cruz. We asked Joy Schendledecker to join us today, but she actually is at a meet and greet for her campaign. She will be here tomorrow with Fred Keeley on air to debate many, many topics about the mayoral race. But for now, what I'm going to do is just try to lay out my concerns. This is very personal for me, and it is for a lot of people, and a lot of young people I know who have told me I have lied in bed at night just weeping about the climate crisis. We all know that it's a serious thing. I think most of you listening out there, KSQD listeners, probably understand it is a serious problem. But I'm not sure how much it's actually on the minds of our politicians and our local leaders. And that's one of the reasons I became a climate activist. And my journey to becoming a climate activist was I always felt like it was an important issue and that the confusion around climate denialism was problematic for me because I thought, well, there's a lot of reasons the fossil fuel industry would have for promoting this climate denialism that the news media was sort of reporting as equal to the reality of climate change created by human beings. And then I just had that in the back of my mind for a long time. I was doing my coaching work, my spiritual work. I had a podcast, and I happened to interview an ocean scientist in the midst of interviewing a lot of psychologists and spiritual teachers. It was a local ocean scientist who told me about acidification of the oceans. And it was the first time I was like, oh, you mean our oceans are changing because of global heating? Like, how does that work? And it's because they've absorbed so much carbon dioxide to the point where the chemistry of the oceans is changing. The oceans have absorbed a tremendous amount of our heat. And then we have a question about how much more heat can they absorb for us before the oceans themselves become a carbon emitter. And so these are things that, keep me up at night, as well as the young people I've talked to. In 2016, Donald Trump was elected. There was so much going on. It was insane. After a couple of years, I thought, I've got to focus on one thing. I'm going to focus on climate. I got to work with Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a wonderful organization pushing for a carbon tax at the congressional level. That's like the bare minimum of what we need right now. And then in the midst of all that, a friend of mine sent me a paper called Deep Adaptation by Jem Bendell. And Jem Bendell is a professor at the University of Cumbria, who basically was saying, I took some time out to really look at the science. And one thing that we haven't considered is whether or not it's too late. And we are going to see what he calls social collapse. This was a 35-page paper. It's one of the most downloaded papers on the internet. You can find it under Deep Adaptation. Do a search for Deep Adaptation. You can add in Jem Bendell, Jembendell. And when I read the paper, I remember being angry with my friend for sending it to me. Because I was like, this has changed like my whole worldview, my whole life. I was in sadness for some time. I was in grieving because I realized that the way he presented things was like, it was very kind. It was very gentle. It wasn't ideological. It wasn't angry. It wasn't like in panic and anxiety. It was about, look, I think we need to start thinking about what's really coming down the pike at this point, based on feedback loops that we have triggered, based on things like the ocean can't handle any more heat, based on, Arctic melt and loss of the reflective capacities of the snow and ice. That's the albedo effect. So it's basically, as things heat up, they heat up even more. There's a sort of exponential heating that starts to happen as we trigger what are called trigger points. So that's the context that I'm, the wonderful, happy context that I'm, going to lay down for the basis of our conversation. Because when I looked at city politics and county politics, I was like, it feels like we're not paying attention, like we're not responding to this. How do we respond to this in a mature way, in a way that our young people can feel like, oh my gosh, maybe we can be safe. Maybe we can be part of the solution somehow. That's what I would really like to see as a mother, is how do we as a city, as a county, step up and be a role model. And, you heard about that from me on my campaign. So I'm going to introduce my guests now. And before I do that, I just have to say one thing, that we have people waiting in the wings that I have promised we will not discuss Measure O2. I have promised them. So if we start discussing Measure O, we're going to start getting all kinds of phone calls, and that might be okay too. But really, I want to keep it a little more general on climate and development, because we're trying to be balanced and fair here before the election at KSQD, and make sure that if we're discussing a measure or candidates, both sides get their time. And I will be reading something from Joy Schendledecker midway through this program. So my guest, Michael Levy, is sitting right here in the studio. Hi, Michael.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Amy.
Michael Levy is a longtime Santa Cruz resident, a climate activist, a much-loved local musician, and a peer counseling leader. He started the climate resiliency organization Transition Santa Cruz, based on the Transition Town movement, which was about getting off of fossil fuels in Santa Cruz, and did that for 5 years. He's recorded an album of original music about the climate emergency, available at michaellevyband.com. That's Levy is the Levy part, michaellevyband.com, and worked with Extinction Rebellion Santa Cruz and myself as part of that group to carry out local direct actions on behalf of planetary survival. He is a regular volunteer at the Homeless Garden Project. We also should have on the line with us, coming into the studio through Clean Feed, Rick Longinotti. Rick Longinotti is on the board of directors for the Art of Communication, Nonviolent Communication Santa Cruz. He is the lead for the Committee for Sustainable Transportations. He happens to be involved with the Yes on O campaign, but like I said, we're not going to go there. And if we happen to, yes, we could take a call to balance that quote or whatever happens here. And Longinotti has been involved in many campaigns. Local political people know him very well. As being very involved in many campaigns to try to stop developments, locate developments in the right places, or stop, for example, highway expansion in the interests of mitigation of the climate crisis. Hi, Rick, are you there?
I'm here, Amy, and I'm ready to follow your discipline about Measure O.
Okay, fantastic. I can feel the community kind of like breathing around the studio, just waiting. And also we have Fred Keeley. Fred has served on a broad range of nonprofit boards, some of which include the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. He's a founding board member of that group. The Sempervirens Fund, served as board lead on the establishment of the Cotonee Coast Dairies National Monument, and Housing Santa Cruz County, also a founding board member. Convener of the city's Council Advisory Committee on Homelessness, where I served with Fred Keeley, and also of the Public Safety Task Force. Most recently, Fred was a leading advocate and fundraiser for the highly successful campaign to defeat Measure D, which sought to permanently remove rail transit from Santa Cruz County. Fred's service as an elected official has included 8 years as a Santa Cruz County supervisor, 6 as a state assembly member, and 10 as Santa Cruz County treasurer. Hi, Fred, also running for mayor. Welcome.
Amy, good to see you again. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I do have to share some breaking news that Fred passed me a news release as he was walking in with his new recommendations for the downtown expansion plan to increase the affordable density requirements to 20% overall, including the density bonuses, which is actually kind of a big deal, and that no single building be more than 12 stories, inclusive of any density bonus incentive. So no building will be the 15 or the 16 that we've heard that the council has sort of recommended that the city explore.
Or 13 or 14 or any other number above 12.
And the other recommendation that he would make as mayor is to direct planning department staff to incorporate these revisions in the preferred alternative project description in the EIR. So that's
There's one other item on there. I want to make sure you do it. The current council direction is 1,600 units minimum. And in this direction, if I'm elected mayor, I will carry this agenda item. It's 1,600 units maximum.
Okay.
That's a huge difference, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. And how did you come to that?
By talking to thousands of people when I walk precincts and when I go to the kind of meeting probably Joy is at right now, a meet and greet, an open house, whatever. People talk only about 3 things at the door: homelessness, Amy, homelessness, and affordable housing. And then the way they frame it is, what the hell are they thinking about downtown? And so there's just, it doesn't seem to matter where you are on the political spectrum, you're opposed to that. And so my thought is, based on all of that input, including the neighborhood around the downtown expansion plan area, including that neighborhood, people think this is more than a little bit of a step in the right direction, and makes sense for us to evaluate that rather than something that isn't going to happen and is dividing the community.
I see. Gotcha. Okay, well, this does tie into our overall conversation about growth and development, because regardless of how tall those buildings are, there will be more buildings. There's a building going up right now at the end of Pacific at Laurel. That, I believe, is 125 units, something like that. If we looked at the RHNA numbers, Regional Housing Needs Assessment numbers for the city, it's 3,000 plus units. I did the math. That's 20 of that size of a building, which will be in different shapes and sizes, but 20 of that size of a building, if we tried to fit it all downtown, which of course we won't, but it's a lot of building and construction. And so I understand there's huge pressure for affordable housing. We're in a housing crisis. I talked to people who were afraid to leave graduate school at UCSC because they didn't know if they could find a place to live. People working at coffee shops, living in their cars, trying to just make a living here and be here in Santa Cruz with us. And so it is a real crisis. I feel that. I know that. And there are different ways that we have people in politics, and our candidates are trying to address, these different measures are trying to address this crisis. But I want to go back to the root of the issue here, or the root problem that we're trying to discuss, which is the climate crisis. And I guess what I wonder is, here's a quote from the paper Deep Adaptation that I mentioned by Jem Bendell. There will be a near-term collapse in society with serious ramifications for the lives of readers of this paper, he writes. he was someone who took some time off to look at all the evidence and kind of figure out, what am I doing? Where are we? What's real? What's actually happening? And he says, I began to conclude that we can no longer work with the assumption or the hope that we can mitigate, slow down, or stop the climate crisis in any meaningful way. Now, okay, I know this is a biggie, right? He says here, the simple evidence of global ambient temperature rise is indisputable. 17 of the 18 warmest years in the 136-year record all have occurred since 2001, and global temperatures have increased by 0.9 degrees Celsius since 1880. This is until 2018. The most surprising warming is in the Arctic, where the 2016 land surface temperature was 2.0 Celsius degrees above the 1981-2010 average. That's a huge jump, breaking the previous records of 2007, 2011, and 2015 by 0.8 degrees Celsius, et cetera, lots of science, and so on and so forth. He also says the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is notoriously slow to deliver reports. By the time they've got a report out, new science has already been, they're already working on and discovering new things about climate change, and also very much influenced by governments and industries across the world, and therefore quite conservative and behind, and they have been behind in their estimates of climate. So I guess I'm just wondering, what is your analysis? And I'm going to start with Michael, because he's sitting right in front of me. You and I have been climate activists together. And what do you think of, do you think this is real?
I think it is real. And I think the most important word to focus on, which I'm glad that you quoted Jem Bendell using the word hope, because I think that's an often misunderstood word. And I want to say a little bit about it. When we use the word hope, people often interpret it as a proxy for optimism, like things are going to be okay. Well, things are definitely not okay currently, and they are going to get much worse. A 2 degree centigrade increase in global average temperature is a death knell for many countries in the global south, at least. So it's not like that. But hope is... I remember a friend of mine telling me recently that he had interviewed somebody who was doing some good climate project. I think he was the ED of, they were trying to create a local public utility, power utility or something like that. And my friend asked him, given that you know the truth about climate and that we're going to have all this disaster, why do you do this work? Why do you try to make these incremental improvements? And pretty much all the improvements that we make are incremental. Nothing seems to live up to the scale of the climate emergency. And the guy answered, well, it's always worthwhile to save a life. So there are things that we can do to cause less destruction. There are not things that we can do to call off the climate emergency. Maybe there were 20 years ago, but at this point we can't call off the climate emergency, but there's still plenty to do to cause less catastrophe. And really, I think the most useful way of thinking about hope is that it's what Václav Havel from Czechoslovakia said about it. It's an orientation of the spirit. It's a choice that we make about how we want to approach life. So even in the most daunting times, we have the choice. Let's say like someone like Nelson Mandela did in prison. He could have had the choice to lay down and say, I'm defeated. But that was not his choice. And I think similarly, we get to choose to face each day and each challenge as something that we want to take on to make things come out better than they otherwise would.
Thank you so much. I just want to remind everyone that you are listening to 90.7 FM, KSQD, KSQD, your home for all things wonderful in music and local news on your FM dial. My name is Amy Chen Mills. You are on Talk for the Bay. We're talking with mayoral candidate Fred Keeley, environmental and climate activist Michael Levy, and Rick Longinotti with the Committee for Sustainable Transportation, who is on line with us on the computer. And you can join in, too, if you want to call or text into the station. I'm going to give you the number real quick, but then we'll get to Rick. It's 831-900-5773. 831-900-5773. You can call, you can text, and you can email on air at ksqd.org. And I'm going to go to Rick. Rick, are you there?
Yeah. Thanks, Amy. Thanks for putting the question out about the possibility of collapse. And, it's something that is sort of in the dark shadows in the back of my mind, and I think for all of us.
Yeah.
And it's great to bring it out in front so we can just look at it, And a few years ago, I read Jared Diamond's book called Collapse. And, what was helpful about that book was that it kind of got me out of denial, not that I'm agreeing with the prediction that we are going to collapse or whatever, but that it is a possibility. It's certainly a possibility. And to notice how people in different civilizations have dealt with it. I'm thinking of the Easter Islanders. The Easter Island used to be a heavily wooded island, and the Polynesians who lived there ended up cutting down every single tree on that island. And so by the time the Westerners, Captain Cook, discovered it, there were no trees on the island. And I'm thinking about, well, what was taking place in the minds of the people who cut down the last few trees, And that's what's really scary to me.
Uh-huh.
It's like, and I see that with, for example, our policies about building highways and expanding highways, like, are we gonna go to the edge of the precipice and still have the last highway project ready to go?
Right. Right.
It says something about us that we don't tend to wake up to stuff. And it's built into our economic system, but it's also part of our psyche.
Yeah. When I was running for office for county supervisor, someone told me, a supervisor told me first, you can't run on climate. And then someone else told me it's psychologically almost impossible for people to really grasp and want to think about what you're talking about. And I get that because it was difficult. It's been difficult for me. There's a whole emotional process you've got to go through. I'm going to go to Fred Keeley and see what he thinks. Now, you've been in sort of like the centers of power in California and the state assembly and county board of supervisors. And I guess part of me is like, I want my leaders to understand. Like, I want them to be the ones saying, hey, guys, guess what? Wake up. Hello. We got to do stuff and we got to do it fast. We got to do everything in our power. And it's not something that I've seen, which is one of the reasons I ran, even to just get the word out somehow. What do you think? Is this your analysis too? Do you have a more optimistic analysis? What are your thoughts as a former politician?
A former one, huh? Okay, so
well, possibly. Well, yeah, you're still very much in that world.
Anyway, I'm just kidding around with you. I thought that was the compelling reason for your candidacy. You talked to me about it before you did it. We talked during the time you were doing it, and I admire you carrying that flag. Because it won't be issue number 1 or 2 or 3 in a supervisor race.
Right.
It's probably not going to be issue number 1, 2, or 3 in an assembly race or a mayor's race or a city council race. I think Joy experiences the same thing I do. People, when you knock on their door unprompted in terms of the conversation, they say homelessness, affordable housing, and what the hell's going on downtown? And then that's probably 70 or higher % of what you hear at the door.
Yeah.
And then from number 3 to number 4, 5, 6, and 7 is like stepping off a cliff. And that's where climate change comes up. When people talk to, I suspect to Joy, but they do it with me as well.
Yeah, me too.
And that is, it may be top of mind in anxiety for many people, but I don't think they see the connection to, let's say, well, what can a mayor or a city council member or supervisor actually do? And so I would stipulate to everything that's been said, what Rick said and the two of you have said, as to the seriousness of the problem and whether we shout it from the rooftop or say it in a less emotional, threatening way, like you just did about the words that you use about hope and the way the author framed it up, which is maybe easier to consume than when somebody's shouting at you about it. I think the question, I'll stipulate to every bit of that, why wouldn't I? And to me, the question is, well, what can be done?
Yeah.
And I think unless you're a United States senator or president of the United States or president of China or whatever, we're going to have to say, well, what can we do? We're not those people.
Yeah.
And so if you'd like or don't like what's going on in Washington, D.C. or Sacramento, and I might say in favor of my former colleagues in the California legislature, they have actually done more than a little. The governor says you can't sell an internal combustion engine after a certain date in California. Well, in the reality of the size of the market of automobiles, that's tomorrow. And the legislature and the governor have done other things as well that I think are more than symbolic.
Yeah.
They're not enough, I'll stipulate to that, but they're more than nothing. So I think when we talk about what can we do at local government, let me just tick through a few quick issues. I think that, first of all, drought-proofing our water system, that's a defensive move, but it needs to happen, and it needs to happen pretty quick. I think the intercity rail, the fact that Measure D, which I was a leader on defeating Measure D, the very wrong-headed so-called Greenway, which was neither green nor the way, would have torn up the tracks and abandoned intercity rail between Santa Cruz and Watsonville, which I think is not only an environmental issue but a race and class issue. And then we're left with only highway widening. So it's no surprise why 30% of the electorate said, yeah, I want to tear up the tracks, and 70% said, hell no. So I think there are things like that. I think there's also...
Okay, hang on. I'm going to stop you for a sec. We do have a caller, so we might want to get that comment. And I had other comments flying through my brain, but let's just go to the caller for now. And Fred, hold on to those points. Jack. I'm sorry, Jack on line 2.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you. And I'm listening to the conversation, and I don't quite share that darkness of outcome on climate, because I know there are really capable climate scientists like Michael Mann telling us that that degree of civilization collapse is not a done deal, and what we do will make the difference.
Well, I'm just going to say there was no degree mentioned, right?
Yeah.
So we don't know what the degree will be. I mean, if you look at Pakistan right now, they're suffering from a form of collapse, right? I mean, just because we live in what's called the global north doesn't mean that collapse is actually not happening in some areas already. I just want to point that out, because we get, we're a little insulated. But go ahead.
Well, where I'd like to go is, what can we do here in Santa Cruz that we have a handle on? Well, I just recently read that the mayor of the city of Paris, France, in 2020 announced that the city will embark on a plan to eliminate half of all on-street car parking spaces by, I believe it's 2026. So they're eliminating 700,000 car parking spaces and turning that public space over to the residents and saying, what do you want to do with this available urban space? How about bike lanes, bike parking, children's parks, vegetable gardens, public toilets? You tell us what you need. And we'll do this in the spirit of reducing climate emissions from cars and making our streets more livable and transforming our transportation system.
Okay, Jack, those all sound wonderful.
Oh, that for me, that means, for that, our version of that in Santa Cruz does not include building another parking garage downtown.
Okay. Okay, I hear you. And we're not going to go there on this show. You could call that in tomorrow when Joy and Fred are going to be talking together here at KSQD. We're going to go to a quick break here at 90.7 FM, KSQD, K-Squid, your spot for all news and wonderful music and everything on your FM dial. Hi. We were just having a little conversation here. This is Amy Chen Mills. You are on KSQD 90.7 FM, K-Squid, your ink spot on the dial. This is Talk of the Bay. We are with mayoral candidate Fred Keeley, formerly with the Assembly, the Board of Supervisors, County Treasurer, Michael Levy, Extinction Rebellion climate activist, also founder of Transition Town Santa Cruz, and Rick Longinotti, who is the lead for the Committee for Sustainable Transportation. We do not have Joy Schendledecker in the studio with us. She sent a statement in. I'm going to read that statement to give her some equal time, and it might open up a different kind of dialogue based on what she has written for the show. She says, I'm very sorry I couldn't be here to participate fully as an eco-socialist feminist. Climate change has been one of my biggest concerns since I became politically aware as a teen, which I carry that with me as a candidate and hopefully into office. We cannot be single-issue voters. Everything is connected through the intersections of race, class, and gender. Thousands of years of patriarchy, hundreds of years of colonization, and the intensification of capitalism during the so-called Anthropocene, which is this period that we're in that is very much impacted by human beings, the Anthropocene, have exploited people and the planet to the point of multiple existential crises, economic, humanitarian, and ecological. With the rise of neo-fascism and the ever-increasing hoarding of global wealth by a small group of men, it is easy to see the link between attacks on women, trans, and genderqueer people and continued attacks on the earth. I am not anti-growth or anti-housing, as a few detractors have claimed. What I am for is community-led responses to our housing and climate crises. With any project, we need to ask who is it for and why are we doing it? Is it for people or profits? Is it worth the collateral damage to our environment? Do we have alternatives that will cause less harm? Sometimes we will decide to sacrifice the environment in order to house people or to have good jobs, but we should at least be honest about the trade-offs and the inevitable sacrifice zones. Ultimately, we will not survive if we don't care for the environment. Locally, we see this play out with the adoption and an abandonment of a Green New Deal resolution and the expensive, more than $200,000 use of Rincon consultants for a cookie-cutter start to our climate action plan development rather than the use of our own community expertise. If we are serious about addressing the climate crisis in our community, our budget priorities must shift. Instead of year-on-year increasing the percentage of our budget that goes to policing, now 31%, and environmental remediation, we need to focus on prevention services instead of subsidizing housing for cars. And again, she mentions a parking garage that she says will delay construction of affordable housing. And we should focus on public transportation. This is also one of the most important things we can do locally to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and is both an economic and climate justice issue. Instead of approving a new neighborhood stadium and entertainment zone in a diverse working class existing area, which is also projected to flood during extreme weather events by 2030, we should be looking to the community for leadership on where and what kind of development they want for improving their neighborhoods. Regarding UCSC, there should be no increase in enrollment until there is affordable housing available for all students, staff, and faculty. They could have built thousands of units of housing over the past 20 years in approved, uncontested infill areas, but they chose not to. Finally, I would like to note that campaign finance reform is key to protecting our environment. As long as we have candidates and PACs that receive funding from real estate and big business interests, we will not have governance that is truly democratic, transparent, and accountable to the electorate. For more on my policy positions, please go to joyforsantacruz.com. And of course, she will be in studio with Fred Keeley, who's also here right now, tomorrow at 5 p.m. on Talk of the Bay. So I want to kind of shift a little bit because I know about Measure D, of course, and I donated to that campaign, and Fred enrolled me in that campaign.
The no on D part. Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, no on D. And I support, trying to get us out of cars. I support mass transit. I support these nice, wonderful things, and they are good things, and we should be doing everything we can. I also look at the system that we're in, and this is where I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect. The United States consumes so much energy compared to the rest of the world and consumes so much product. And that includes the building of buildings. And as Rick mentioned, the building of highways. And not only are we dealing with a climate collapse, and the reason I say that is because I think we'll see some collapse. I think we're already seeing it. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, has said we are at the end of the age of abundance. And then the Saudi head of the energy department for Saudi Arabia has recently said it's the end of cheap energy for the world. So Macron was trying to say there's just going to be kind of like one crisis after another at this point because we have overconsumed on this planet. And the figure I've heard is that we consume 1.6 planets every year, meaning 0.6 more than what is sustainable. So even electric cars, and I have an electric car. My husband just got an electric car, and I told him, okay, it's still a new car. There's all this embodied carbon in the steel, and we are still mining, and we are still losing 200 to 250 species per day. Now, the caller said, that's very dark. And I know because I got depressed just researching for the show. However, facts themselves are not dark or light. They're just facts. Do you understand? We can't say, oh, it's too dark, we can't think about it. We have to say, let's think about it. And so what I want to see, and I'd like to hear from all three of you about this, is a rail trail. When will that be? 10 years if we move quickly? Possibly? No?
Shorter.
Short 5?
Maybe that, yeah.
Okay, maybe 5.
And segments are already in place. So.
Okay, so... And that's great. And we've got so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, 417 parts per million. That is 3 more parts per million than last year. And it has been said by scientists, many, many scientists, 420 is it. It's the point of no return. That is where we're at. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like, what else can we do to, can we look at reality and say, maybe, and this is what I talked about on my campaign, we should have food security. We could go to regenerative agriculture. That will draw carbon. We need to draw carbon out of the atmosphere. We can't just stop putting carbon in. Carbon lasts for 100 years in the atmosphere. So I'm trying to turn this to more like, can we continue in this endless growth sort of capitalist society this way? Yes, Michael.
This is something I really want to talk about.
Okay,
go. As you know, Amy, I recently wrote an op-ed for the Sentinel about the need, I think it was titled, The Need to Get Away from Our Addiction to Growth. And this whole idea of getting away from growth has gained a lot of traction lately. There's even a movement called the degrowth movement. And I think that there's a lot of reality to that, is that under our current system, we just keep growing things, and consumption, gross national product just keeps going up year after year. And obviously that's not sustainable. And yet it may not be the most useful framing to talk to people and say, we have to shrink, we have to have less. That is not going to appeal to very many people. And in terms of something hopeful, really for me, the hopeful thing that can turn things around is really everyday people and the organization of working people. And this is something that we all need to get on. Organizing of working people has sort of been in decline since probably the 1930s, and particularly since 1970 or so. And it's starting to pick up now. We're seeing strikes happening at Amazon and Starbucks, teacher strikes. And this is the power that can actually get politicians to do what needs to happen. Politicians can't do it on their own. They need the people to be demanding things. And the way that it's going to be of interest to people is if we talk about abundance and more and not less. So I just want to give a little framing for what we need less of. I mean, when we say growth is damaging and we need less, there's certain things we need less of, and there's certain things that we can have more of as we address what we need less of. So here's a little list that I want to share.
Okay, we got to go to Rick because he has to leave in 4 minutes.
Okay, I'll make this quick. So some of the things that I think we can have less of that will be helpful, we need less of people who feel enslaved to their jobs. We need less scarcity of the things that we really need. In other words, we need more of certain things, but many people don't have enough of things they really need. We need less disregard for people and the places that we live in. We need less stuff that we don't need. We need less inequality. That's probably the biggest one. But then we need more. We need more respect for people. We need more equality. We need more health. All these things are compatible with less mining, with less fossil fuel use, with less consumption overall. So I just think it's really important for us to frame this in a way that is going to be of interest to people. And just one last point is that one of the best political things to embody that, of course, is the Green New Deal, which is not yet fleshed out and needs a lot more work, but it's in the right direction.
Thank you so much. And I know, Rick Longinotti, you have to go. You have a family event, a special family event.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. What I would just like to add is the idea that social capital is our greatest resource. In other words, our connectedness to each other. This is how we're going to get through hard times, however they may look. And we know from getting through hard times like, earthquake in Santa Cruz in 1989, how people came together. We spent the night in our neighbor's backyard, and later on we got alienated because we put up an Obama sign in our yard, and that alienated them. But, for the moment that we were in the crisis, we were together. There was no separation.
Oh, that's interesting.
And we need that. We need that desperately. The Measure D campaign is just an example of how we didn't have that.
Mm-hmm.
There was just mudslinging going on like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That causes scar tissue in the community. It's really hard to repair. So we need to make it a priority. As we're working towards what we believe in, we're going to run into people who equally feel that they're the ones who are the right, and we need to realize they're our brothers and sisters. They're part of our community. We are in this together.
Thank you so much, Rick. Yeah, I appreciate that from someone who's been in the thick of the mud swamp with Measure O, and these measures people care deeply about and are very, very emotional about. I also do hope that we can all kind of let it go when it's over and come back together. Keeley's, I think, talks about that quite a bit in disagreeing without being disagreeable, right, is your motto. And we do have someone on the line. You've got let's keep it to about a minute. I believe it is Carolyn Rudolph. I know Carolyn.
Thank you so much. Yes, I know you too. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I thank you for everything that people are saying and for their courage to even step up and want to run for offices. And I have to point out that we live in a place that has very sacred land, and it's called farmland. And we are at this point nourishing the United States from right here. And this land just keeps being developed and built on. And the people who work the land, the farmers, these are our heroes, because without nutrition, none of it matters, right? We need to nourish our bodies so we can be healthy and be active and engaged. And we all know that Silicon Valley was once the Valley of Heavenly Delight, the most fertile land, and now it's built on because as humans, we get excited, but we forget to think forward. And so I just want to just put my vote in, since I myself am very organic. Produce is extremely important to me in my livelihood.
Because you own a restaurant. Yeah, you own Charlie Hong Kong. Yeah.
I do. And it's so important to nourish people and to respect that we want services. So these people who are serving us, to respect them, and it's noble work to serve people.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Yeah. I can kind of feel the ballot trying to edge in here on this conversation. And that has to do with Measure S and Measure Q down in South County in Watsonville to protect farmland or to allow for some exceptions to develop in farmland. I was reading a book called, just recently, I've just started it, The Future is Degrowth, A Guide to a World Beyond Capitalism. Now, that may seem, in this country, like such a radical notion. In Europe, they are really looking into this much more. And some of the principles of degrowth in this book would be, for example, differentiating between sectors that can grow and need investment, critical public sectors, clean energy, education, health. I think of tourism as part of our economy. I think of maybe like agro-tourism, and then other parts that we need to degrow, like fossil fuel use, like mass production, mass consumption, that kind of thing. Strong progressive taxation of income, profits, and wealth, reduced working hours, and job sharing. Sometimes I think about, could we just slow down a little? And I don't know. I sometimes think minimalism is actually a beautiful thing. People actually do that on purpose. Like, I'm not going to work at this job and kill myself so I can have this huge house that then needs to be cleaned and maintained. And I'm going to actually just live in a small house and have a simple job and have free time. That's also a kind of abundance, I think. Agricultural transformation towards regenerative agriculture based on biodiversity conservation. Fair agriculture employment conditions and wages. That would be what Carolyn would support, I think. Reduction of consumption and travel. That's sort of luxurious and wasteful, and more basic, necessary, sustainable, and satisfying consumption and travel. Debt cancellation, especially for workers and small business owners, and for countries in the global south, from the richer countries and international financial institutions. They will suffer and are suffering already from our consumptive habits in what's called the global north. Fred, do you have any comments? I know it's hard to take this big global picture and apply it locally, but I guess I feel like it's such an urgent crisis, that we should all be doing locally, citywide, countywide things.
I have a couple of thoughts on it.
Yes.
One is the guide, the future of degrowth, a guide to a world beyond capitalism, should probably also include whatever China wants to call itself these days, communist, socialist, whatever they want to call themselves. Mm-hmm. They are certainly seriously implicated in the global climate change crisis. And they are trying to move billions of people from basically serfdom to possibilities for middle income life that mirrors life in the West. And if they do nothing and we do everything, we will fail. So I don't think this is limited to capitalist countries or capitalist economies. I
think though it's related to extraction and production.
Well, good. Then we can drop
absolutely.
the economic model and say what the enemy is. The enemy,
right. Although I'm not actually necessarily anti-capitalist at some level, but then at some point with the stock market, it's like, these companies,
stock market, and you watch, inflation's up, people are nervous, and the stock market continues to rise above 31,000. That's fine for the moneyed class, but it's not fine for the rest of us.
That's right.
But let me go to your issue.
Okay,
go
ahead.
Because what do we do locally? There are innumerable actions we can take individually and as local governments. We've already talked about some of them. And let me say there are things so that people have that sense of hope that you're talking about. Let me talk about a moderate success on this. So the Monterey Bay and the coast of California used to have an absolutely crazy amount of abundance of sea life. And from the early 1800s through the 1970s, the extractive uses in the ocean of marine life was unabated. And when it became clear that we had gone from abundance to scarcity, we could no longer not manage it. It was time to get in and figure out how to do that. So when I was in the Assembly, I authored the Marine Life Management Act and the Marine Life Protection Act. And what we did is said we're going to set up a series of marine protected areas up and down the 1,100-mile coastline, dealing with the entire water column. And what we're going to do is manage in a scientific way from scarcity to sustainability. And in 20 years, that has actually happened. And so I think we should also, in the spirit of hope, say that there are those things that can actually work.
You guys are trying to get me to feel hopeful,
No,
aren't
I'm
you?
not I'm not trying to get you to,
No, I want to be
feel
hopeful.
anyway, because the one true thing we have about ourselves is our feelings. So I never try to talk people out of their feelings. But my point is that we can do this. I really believe we can do this. It's who do we send to Sacramento and Washington, D.C.? What do we do as individuals that reduces the demand side of a supply side economy?
Yeah, and how do we pressure our representatives and call them and be on their case to, okay, I don't think we're going to be able. Darius has a question. Darius, I don't think we're going to have the time because we are getting close. And I have something that I just want to share, because we have a possible future mayor in the room and we have a climate activist.
Can I say something about Joy's statement? Very quickly.
Very quickly.
It is very typical of her, which is well thought through, intelligent, rooted in a belief system. She and I have not said one crossword to each other because we don't feel like we're running against each other. We're both running for mayor. And there's another example of what a good person she is.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I appreciate, that I've learned to appreciate about campaigns, is that it's a time for dialogue. It's a time for the community to step up. And if people aren't talking about climate, well, I'm going to talk about climate, And so, for example, what I see in some cities, and there's a beautiful Earth Island Journal issue in August, that sort of talks about cities actually consume tremendous amounts of resources and put out tremendous amounts of waste. And a lot of what we do is impact outside the city that we don't see. Biodiversity loss, droughts and this kind of thing, because we're using so much water, including the heating of the planet, which contributes to that. But for me, I'm like, there are things that other cities are doing. France with their water system. I think part of the state of New York is doing this amazing thing with using swamps to clean out water, making rivers, giving them legal rights, giving them personhood in New Zealand, planting all kinds of trees, orchards in urban orchards, urban farms. I know we have some trees on the docket in the climate action plan that's coming our way. I feel like I would feel better if we were really adding in the feminine. Joy talks about being a feminist, eco-socialist. Nature is here. We are on this land. We have the Alma Mutsun Tribal Band and other groups that want to steward the land, that are stewarding the land. Could we move in that direction? And sometimes I feel like people say Santa Cruz is so liberal and so progressive, and I don't know. I'm like, maybe I'm not seeing the right things, but I always feel like there's so much pushback to these really innovative ideas that would make me feel as a mother like, hey, my city is cool, man. We're doing regenerative ag would be so great because it has so much potential to draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We are in an ag paradise, and we're spraying a lot of pesticides, using a lot of fertilizer. That actually releases carbon dioxide out of the soils into the atmosphere. If we can create healthy soils, we can draw carbon down. We could be a role model for the nation. And so maybe we will. That's what I want. I want to be like, hey, so proud of my community, and hey, do what we're doing because it's really cool.
Yeah, I want to appreciate the way that you're framing that, Amy. They're talking about what our community does, what we do on the policy level, what we do together. And it's very common in the world of thinking about climate for many of us to think about, what can I do? Maybe I should get an electric car. Maybe I should recycle more.
Right. Or maybe I should feel guilty.
And none of that is going to really make much of a difference.
That's right.
You and I have tangled about this a little bit.
Have we?
There's a really great essay that I recommend people look up by Derek Jensen. It's called Forget Shorter Showers, about this very issue. What we really need to do is the collective action that you're talking about.
We need policy change.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. I think we're getting to the end of our time. We have 2 more minutes. Is that right? I want to thank Fred Keeley, candidate for mayor. Thank you so much for coming in today. Join Fred Keeley and his opponent, Joy Schendledecker, tomorrow at 5 p.m. on Talk of the Bay right here at 90.7 FM, KSQD. I want to thank Michael Levy, a climate activist and dear friend of mine who has actually gone to the pipelines and laid his body down with everyone else, risking arrest to stop the fossil fuel industry, which I'm going to just say right here since I have the mic, out of control. Out of control. And Rick Longinotti, who is with the Committee for Sustainable Transportation. I feel like we're just opening up this conversation. I'd love to have another one at some other time. We could do 2 hours or more, I think, on this and take all the calls. We got a lot of calls, a lot of interest from the community. Thank you so much for joining us on Talk of the Bay. And let's have a little hope. We can always have hope for something. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful evening.